Hello, it's Stuart here. I'm going to present a video in a moment, recording of about a year ago. A Dutchman is calling in to challenge Matt Dillahunty and asking him why he's ruled out two types of logic in favor of classical binary logic. He's proposing that it's possible to put forward a dichotomy which dispenses with the word existence. And he's referring to two particular branches of logic, one of which is paraconsistent logic. I'm not familiar with this term. I've done some research on it, and I'm just going to read out a sort of rudimentary definition. Here we go with that. A paraconsistent logic is a way to reason about inconsistent information without lapsing into absurdity. In a non-paraconsistent logic, inconsistency explodes in the sense that if a contradiction obtains, then everything else obtains too. Okay, so the other logic that he mentions, the other system is called intuitionistic logic. Well, the very word intuition doesn't sort of fill me with any confidence that this is a particularly useful form of logic for solving the question over whether God exists or not, but nevertheless, I believe it excludes the law of excluded middle. It dispenses with that, and let me just read out something. Intuitionistic logic, sometimes more generally called constructive logic, refers to systems of symbolic logic that differ from the systems used for classical logic by more closely mirroring the notion of constructive proof. In particular, systems of intuitionistic logic do not assume the law of the excluded middle and double negation elimination, which are fundamental inference rules in classical logic. Okay, well, let's go ahead with the call then and see what he does. I don't think he does anything terribly special. And to be honest with you, Matt does an absolutely brilliant deconstruction of it. He explains it beautifully well, why it's not anything special and why he's not really introducing anything new, and why what he does introduce Matt would immediately agree with. But enough from me, let's go on and look at the call. Okay, here we go with the call. Let's try it out.
Hello, how you doing?
Hi Matt, hi Everyday Theist. I'm doing fine, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Doing all right.
Yeah. Yes, my question is, how did you determine that when talking about the existence of a God, that it's only binary classical logic that applies? And how did you rule out, for instance, intuitionistic logic or paraconsistent logic, where paraconsistent logic allows for contradictions, and intuitionistic logic, and that's a really hard word for me to pronounce, but I'll just keep trying, where intuitionistic logic simply rejects the law of excluded middle?
Oh, okay. Well, that was going to be my initial response, which is when we're talking about the existence of something, right? It's a either it does or it doesn't, right? So abiding by the classical laws of logic.
Well, I think that's semantics. When talking about the existence of a God, it's semantics, and I can show that in 4 simple steps.
Hang on.
Well,
hang on.
Can
so first of all, semantics is important. Semantics is important because semantics is about what words mean or how they're being used. And so all I'm going to say is that if I accept identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle, and if you don't accept that, then we're not going to be able to talk about this in the same way. Because when I say that everything is either A or not A, if you come in and say, well, that's not the case, then you're talking about a logic that I don't accept.
Just breaking in there for a moment, having had a quick look at those other two forms, spheres of logic, it seems to me that the laws of classical binary logic are absolutely the right laws to analyze this question about whether God exists or whether God doesn't exist. And I think on that basis, I would probably rule out any other system of logic, because it seems to me that this is the best system. So let's see if what he presents is anything fundamentally different.
So you're completely ruling out intuitionistic logic then?
I have no reason to rule it in when we're talking about the existence of X, that X either exists or it does not. No other possibility other than X either exists or it does not makes any sense to me.
Right, but I think that I can reword the dichotomy in such a way that we get rid of the word existence and still remain the meaning of the dichotomy, that it's either true that God exists or it's not true that God exists. And I can show it in 4 little simple...
Well, if it's still a dichotomy, then it doesn't really depart significantly from the rules of classical binary logic. So I don't know why he cited those other 2 forms of logic.
Steps that I think you will agree with every step.
Hang on. You just said you were going to do this where you get rid of the word existence, but the word existence is the thing in question. And then you said you would still reach the conclusion that either God exists or God does not exist. So why on earth would you go through all this work to get to the thing that I already accept?
I can reword the dichotomy and get rid of the word existence while maintain the meaning.
That's not what I asked you.
Why would it be important to dispense with the word existence when this is the very thing in question?
If your conclusion at the end of all this, is still either God exists or God doesn't exist, what's the point in going through it if Justin and I already accept that either God doesn't?
No, at the end, the conclusion is we're talking about properties of reality. That's why I think it's a semantics thing.
It's not, okay. I'll give you your minute.
Go through the 4 steps.
I just said I'll give you your minute, but I'm bored before you start. So go ahead.
Okay, so you were talking about true or not true. You're talking about truth, and for that to be meaningful, you have to have a definition for truth. And the definition that you use is truth is that what corresponds to reality. Well, for that to be meaningful, you have to have a definition for reality. And the most common definition for reality that I think you use is that reality is everything there is, and if tomorrow all life in the universe dies, there is still some reality left in the form of dead planets and stars, for instance. So that's the first step. Well, the second step would be, if there is some foundation to reality, then that foundation itself is also reality, because it falls into the definition that I just gave. And the third step would be, if something like a God is foundational to reality, then that God would also be reality, because it falls into the previous 2 steps. So now I can reword your dichotomy and say, well, it's either true that foundational reality has divine properties, or it's not true that foundational reality has divine properties. And with divine properties, I simply mean all-knowing, all-loving, all-powerful. So now I've reworded your dichotomy without the word existence, and the question now becomes, how do you determine that it's classical binary logic that applies to foundational reality?
No, you haven't.
Sure I have.
And you just used classical binary logic right there at the end, because you said the ultimate thing is that you get to.
I did.
Would you stop interrupting me?
I agree with you.
Would you shut up?
Proceed.
Okay, I tell you what, I'm going to mute you. And
he's just agreed that he used classical binary logic. So what was this strange posturing at the beginning? How did you exclude intuitionistic logic, etc.? It doesn't really make any sense. He's just rewording the dichotomy.
Mute you when I'm done talking, because what you said was, my definition of reality is that, or truth is that which corresponds to reality, and reality is everything there is. And I'm fine with those. And I don't for a second proclaim capital T truth or any of that. But then you say, if there is a foundation to reality, I don't even know what that means. What does it mean that there's a foundation to reality? So that's your first if, which you haven't demonstrated that there is a foundation to reality. Then your second if is, if something like a God is foundational to reality. So you start with reality, and then you say, if there is a God or something like a God, which is foundational to reality, and none of that makes any sense, none of it's been demonstrated at all, but you then get to either it's true that foundational reality has defined properties, or it's not true that foundational reality has defined properties. But that conclusion is either true or not true, which accepts the bivalent logic that I was already talking about. It talks about identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle. So all of your work to remove the word exist is irrelevant, because your case here hasn't demonstrated anything. It didn't demonstrate that there is a foundation to reality. It didn't demonstrate that there's something like a God that serves as a foundation to reality. And so you went through all that work just to get to either it is either true or not true that foundational reality has defined properties. And if you would have started the call by saying it's either true or not true that foundational reality has defined properties, I would have just agreed with you at the start, and we wouldn't have wasted any time on your pedantic little concerns about semantics surrounding the word exist. Now, where did I go wrong?
Well, where you go wrong is that it seems that you're saying that I have made any kind of claim, or that I want to establish something. I started out with a simple question: how did you determine that it's classical binary logic that applies to foundational reality? And how did you rule out that it's intuitionistic logic that...
Stop and listen. I asked you where I went wrong, and your response to that was, I went wrong by assuming that you had a point. Is that really what you're saying, that my error was in assuming that you were making a claim?
Yes.
Then goodbye, sir. I don't want to waste any more time with you, because I want to know what people
that's easy,
believe.
Isn't it? Now that's easy.
I want to know.
That is easy. Now you're a coward. Because
I'm not a coward. I'm muting you. I'm not hanging up yet, because I'm pointing out your dishonesty in this conversation. The purpose of this show is for you to tell us what you believe and why. And when you say that I've made a mistake in assuming that you had a claim, that's not a mistake that I made. That's a genuine, reasonable assumption, because that's what the purpose of the fucking show is. But when you call in to say, how did I determine it was bivalent logic? And then you went down to bivalent logic at the end of it, only to avoid words, you are wasting everybody's time. When did you demonstrate that the reality has a foundation and that it is godlike?
You didn't ask. I started out with a question, and you didn't at any point believe, and why. So now you're blaming me that I didn't tell you what I believe and why. You didn't ask me.
You presented an argument. You presented an argument that ultimately agreed with me. What's your fucking point?
No, I asked you, how did you determine that classical binary logic applies to foundational reality?
Did I ever answer that question?
No, I'm still waiting for an answer.
Because I didn't determine
how did you determine that it's classical binary logic? Are you going to try and talk over me at every point?
I swear. All right, goodbye, jackass.
Thanks for tuning in. Yes, so about that video, my thoughts on it. It's the day after the night before. I've had a bit of time to mull it over and think about it. And my conclusion is that I'm disappointed because the caller came on purporting to bring something new to the table. He had these two alternative systems of logic, which he was claiming are more appropriate for solving this issue of whether or not a God exists. And he seems to be rejecting Matt's or traditional forms of binary logic, law of excluded middle, law of non-contradiction, etc. And yet, when he actually presented his scheme, it really appealed back to binary logic and just left the question hanging, begging the question. We know there's a reality, or at least, fairly certain there's a reality. Is there a foundation to that reality, or isn't there? Well, there's your binary choice. And if there is a foundation to that reality, does it have divine attributions or doesn't it? So it still leaves the question hanging, and he's only replaced the word existence, which he seemed very keen to eliminate, with the word is. Is there a foundation or isn't there? Is there a God or isn't there? This is the whole question we're trying to solve. And he complained at the end that he hadn't been given the opportunity to say what he believes and why. Yeah, well, the reason for that is because that's how he structured the call, by his own choice. He asked Matt how he'd excluded these other forms of logic, and then proceeded to argue that they would be more appropriate. And then he presented something which is just classical binary logic anyway, and did not get us any closer to solving the problem of whether or not a God actually exists. So we've had Christians and theists come on before, claiming the reason that atheists don't believe in God is because we're using the wrong tools. So we've had people coming on saying you should be appealing to intuition, for example, to solve this. This is a tool, intuition. And when we point out that intuition is not that reliable, because how do we decide who's right? As an atheist, I could say, I've got the intuition, there's no God. And a theist could say, well, I've got the intuition, there is a God. And so that's the problem. We've got a Christian with intuition that Jesus is real. We've got a Muslim with the intuition that Allah is real, and that's true religion. And this is the whole problem. We need a form of universal logic which can provide us with answers which we can all assess by using a particular scheme to determine whether it's true or not. And from what I've seen, the classical laws of binary logic seem to me the most appropriate for solving this problem of whether something exists or whether it doesn't. Yeah, so he did not get the chance to say what he believes and why. That's a shame, but the way the conversation went, and he'd already spent 15 minutes on this, I didn't really see that it would be appropriate for Matt to suddenly say, okay, well, tell us what you believe and why, mainly because the man was already accusing Matt of being a coward. I don't know why. That did not really seem to be warranted at all. The two systems which he proposed at the start, he did not really give a proper account of them or convince me that he really understood what they were. Okay, yeah, so that's about it. Just one quick comment. I did say on my channel that I had a couple of copyright claims from Atheist Experience, and I did say that I would only be doing voices and no picture. However, I've appealed on the grounds of fair use, because what I'm doing with Atheist Experience material and obviously material from other channels is I'm criticizing and commenting, and I believe that it is considered fair use and that I'm substantially making it my own content. So I've appealed those two claims, and it's a big hassle just to do the sound, and I also think that it's good for you guys, good for my viewers to see what is actually happening with the calls, not just in terms of the dialogue, but also to see what's happening in the studio, expressions on faces, things like that. It's all part of the information. So I'm hoping that I can overturn those copyright claims and present in my normal format. So in the meantime, I will be doing that, and I'll keep you informed about whether I win my appeals. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.